Any idea what that video is showing? Yes, it is the Nutcracker. You recognize the music and some of the spiffy little dancing there. It's the Nutcracker, but I look at that, of course, and I immediately see, because it's tiny little soldiers, I, of course, see a battle going on. And I would like to think, amazingly enough, that this is a reenactment of, and my volunteers, please come on up at this point. This is a reenactment of, somehow, of the great, great Battle of Hastings. Hard to imagine they could actually take a videotape from over 900 years ago. But that's what I would like to imagine, that they are somehow reenacting that battle. And we're going to reenact that battle here in the live class because it's such an important situation in the law. And whenever you want to quit showing that, Anthony, you can. We're going to reenact it, and I think the best way to reenact it is, of course, with some fine volunteers here in class. I am, of course, the leader of the Frenchies. Any idea who who was leading the Frenchies, the Normans from Normandy, France at the time? Any idea? William the Bastard. Yes, that's right. Yes, William the Bastard. And that was a literal ascription to him. I mean, he really was the offspring of a nobleman and his mistress, so he was a bastard. I am, of course, William the Bastard. It's not too much of a stretch for me to play that role. And I am, because I'm from France, I'll put a little more color here, a little bit more fashion style here on my outfit. We have, of course, Frenchmen on one side. We can tell because they are just fashionable. You can tell by their outfits here. And you guys are lined up. And we have on the other side the Angles and some Saxons and maybe even a few Jutes. These are the people from Anglo-Saxon/Viking England in 1066. They were led by Harold. You can take a bow to the audience there, Harold. Harold had just taken over early in 1066 from Edward the Confessor, who died. Harold became the new king. Harold actually fought off some Danes in the northern part of England in late September of 1066, killed his own brother and some other people who were fighting against him. And then he discovered what? That the south of England had now been invaded by several thousand Frenchies, Norman Frenchmen, led by William the Conqueror, who was a relative of Harold, distant relative, and they were now going to clash and fight in the great Battle of Hastings. Because I am the professor, of course, I get to bring a shield as well, and you notice mine seems to be a little bit more substantial, perhaps, than Harold's over there. We are now, with a little bit of music, going to reenact the great Battle of Hastings.
Die, you English pig dog! I spit at you, I curse you, you little stinking English doggy! Oh, I wipe my bottom with your entrails! Die, English dog boy! You are going to die badly and go straight to hell! Die, doggy! Oh, yes! I have killed him! Yes! Oh, yeah! Okay.
Thank you very much, dead King Harold. Good job, men, and I use that term loosely. Men, what does this mean now? What does this mean for England? People like my fine French compatriots there ended up taking over England. And so the guys that fought with me became what? They became the new rulers of England. They didn't totally replace the Saxon hierarchy, the Anglo-Saxon hierarchy, but in most respects, English became ruled by French-speaking Normans. And this was the last successful invasion of England. Hitler didn't succeed. Nobody else. Napoleon didn't succeed. But the French, long, long ago, the Norman French, took over. And why does that impact the law? Well, it impacts the law because it impacted everything in society. King William, on Christmas Day, probably took away his Burger King crown and adorned himself with something a little bit more spiffy. He became the king. The Anglo-Saxon people either were subjected, the hierarchies fled, tended to flee, or died out in some other battles. Now, what happened to England? England became an amalgamation of cultures. It already had had a blending of the Viking influence from the Danes and others. It had an influence from the Scots, certainly from way back in Roman times, the Romans. But now it had an infusion of law from the continent, law and language. This is one reason the English language is so wonderful, I think, is because it is an infusion of so many words. It's so rich in vocabulary because English grew out of now not just Anglo-Saxon Germanic roots, but it also got all these French words, these Latin words, etc. And the law was impacted. Now, did William the Conqueror come in there and say, well, I'm just going to wipe out all of English law? No. For his time, he was a relatively benevolent ruler. Now, I'm not saying he didn't skewer and torture a number of people. Of course he did. You know, you're a medieval ruler. That's what you do. You torture or you end up being tortured. But he was, for his times, not unreasonable. He looked at what the English had, and they didn't have necessarily, for the times, a bad system. It was a fairly well-developed system for his times. So he looked at it and said, there's nothing wrong with the English law. The main problem with the English law, as he saw it, was it just wasn't really as organized as well as it should be. What the English already had was what we now call the common law. They already had it, even before King William became King William, before he was resting on his crown, quaffing his ale, saying, ha, 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 did you see what happened to Harold? Before even that, they had the common law. The common law is called that simply because it is law found throughout the realm. It's common to the realm. But what William said was, the problem is it's not very easy for people to know what that law is. You know what? Novel idea. We ought to make sure it's all written down in books. At least the important cases are. Up to that point, the English judges and magistrates were not necessarily very good about writing down their decisions. Part of the reason for that was not very many people could read or write, including some of the judges. But over time, with rulings by people like King William and his successors, particularly a man named Henry, the English law started to be written down more and more. And so now when they called it common law, it really was common in the sense that people could understand it. They could look it up in books. And so you could get out these books and you could say, even if you're living in Northumbria, you could find a case from Kent or Cornwall or Sussex or Wessex or whatever. And there it is in these books. Now, I'm not saying everything was written down. Of course not. But at least some of the cases, some of the rulings were written down. And that is so important because you can now go beyond simply what judges think has gone on in the past, what's passed down by tradition. You can now look to the actual books. And these books furnish, and this concept is still found to this day, it was the idea of precedent, and common law was there before William, but he helped give it a push. This concept of precedent got a real impetus by putting things in writing. The common law is found in many areas of the world. It is certainly a minority system in that more areas of the world follow the civil law, and some areas don't necessarily follow civil law or common law. There are areas where Islamic law is followed, and people have opined that that's more like common law than civil law, but it's not really either. And there are other areas where maybe they don't follow one or the other, but most areas of the world follow a form of civil law. And a lot of areas of the world, basically all of the areas influenced by the English, tend to follow the common law. So one big country which has a common law system is obviously India. Another big one, of course, is our own country, the United States. And then a number of countries that were colonized by the English over time, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, parts of Africa, the Caribbean, etc., have had some form of common law system. In honor of that, I've put some of these flags up here.